Hello everyone, good day to all of you, and I hope you're all doing well. I wanted to talk today and give a review on the Tavor SAR, which is what I have right here. Had this for quite a while, using it on and off. I am actually loaning this, however, for the review, which will come in relevant later because there's a few parts I would personally change with the setup, but I'm going to be mostly talking about this. It's pretty much stock. In any cases where it's not, I will note that. Mostly going to be going from the buttstock to the front, just talking about this part by part. However, I am going to start this review by talking about what I think are the two most important points, which are kind of the handling, the overall ergonomics, given that this is a bullpup and these aren't the norm, especially for the American market, or probably really any market across the world. And second, also just talking a bit about the accuracy in the barrel, kind of the most important features there. So starting, of course, with the obvious, that this is a bullpup. If you are already familiar with kind of some of that, then feel free to skip ahead. I'll have timestamps in the description below. But bullpup, that just means that the magazine is behind the trigger. And what that allows you to do is have a significantly shorter overall length. For example, this, if I recall correctly, is exactly 27.6 for the entire rifle. And that's even with an 18-inch barrel, which is what I have right here. When you compare that to the length that you would have on an AR, of course, again, exact same length of barrel, 18 inches. And I just made sure the length of pull, I do have this the exact same, so all the ergonomics would feel the same here. And so there you can see how different it really is in terms of the overall length of the rifle. And the best comparison, I think, for a bullpup is an SBR. In particular, this has a 10.3-inch barrel, and again, just to put these up side by side, got the same length of pull on both of these, which in this case is the stock all the way extended. And you can see they're pretty much the same length. Of course, if I collapse the stock on here, it will be a little bit shorter, but that would mess up the length of pull, which is going to be my next point, is the length of pull on this Tavor. The length of pull is not adjustable on this. For me, it is a little bit on the longer side. Usually on an AR stock, for example, I'm usually 4 clicks out, almost all the way out. Whereas compared to this, and as I mentioned on the SBR there that I had, pretty much you extend that all the way and it's going to be the same length of pull. So it is a little bit lengthy. It still works for me. It's pretty well balanced, so it doesn't feel too awkward, but not the optimal length of pull. And obviously if you have a different build, it may be way off, maybe way too long for you in that case. And overall, I think that's going to be a point that'll kind of come up a lot, is I do think the bullpups are a little bit more awkward to handle compared to a conventional rifle setup. They're not as bad as a lot of people on forums make them out to be. You can easily train a lot with this and get very proficient with it. Reloads are not a problem, but there are a few parts of the manual of arms that still are a bit more difficult, in my opinion, on a bullpup. So it does kind of beg the question of why would you bother making this shorter package? Why wouldn't you just get an SBR? Some of the advantages, of course, the biggest one is you don't have that gigantic loss in feet per second in velocity that you would get out of an SBR. So 18-inch ballistics out of this 5.56, of course, which performs just significantly better than it ever would out of a 10.3-inch, where you're losing hundreds of feet per second, which then does take me to the accuracy. So if this is an 18-inch barrel and you have that advantage where you could be more lethal at longer range, and of course, in general, a bit more lethal, would this be a better rifle for longer range? And you know, while it will hold that velocity out there quite a bit more, I still think that this is going to be relegated mostly to kind of the same sort of role that you would use for an SBR, for example, a home defense rifle. It works really well for that. And that's not to say that this rifle is inaccurate or anything. I did some accuracy tests with this as of immediately right now when I am uploading this video. Next week, I'm going to be having an accuracy test come out, and I like to do it separate because the whole video is about 8 minutes, so pretty lengthy to include that in the review itself. But with good hand loads, I'm generally getting about 1.8, maybe 2-ish MOA. The best I got was with Nosslers, and I got a 1.3 MOA, all 10 shots groups. So it is capable of accuracy, but some of the issues I was running into when I was trying to do these accuracy tests is taking up a really good position. Of course, first off, I do know that there's an aftermarket Fab Defense makes kind of a monopod that sticks out here, which I don't really like. That's kind of an awkward spot to rest on. But the issue with, because you can change out this handguard, something nice about the Tavor platform as a whole is that there actually is a decent amount of aftermarket support for it. So you can change out some parts that you don't like. But even if you change to a railed handguard, the barrel itself is not free floated. There's a little band right here at the very front that clamps onto the barrel. I've read that you can apparently remove that barrel band, but I haven't looked too much into it, and I believe that would require the use of different handguard. So not having a bipod does make things a little bit more difficult. Of course, it's still doable. When I did the accuracy test, I was shooting this off of a bag and got pretty good accuracy still, in my opinion. Another issue, however, is if you're doing a nice, kind of more accurate hold where you have your support hand back here, your controls for the bolt catch, the bolt release, is right there. Which, again, for regular reloads and regular stuff that you're doing when you're standing or crouching, it doesn't cause a problem. Your hand is right there when you're reloading. But when you're trying to shoot this accurately, one issue I was running into is I would be inadvertently holding down that bolt catch with my support hand, so it wouldn't lock back on the last round. In some cases, of course, if you just kind of keep a mental note, you can avoid that, but still, there's not a whole lot of room for you to put a rear bag back here. And of course, if you try to do a rear bag in your hand, I don't see any way you could really fit all of that in there without pushing down the bolt lock. However, when you compare this to an SBR, it does have other advantages, of course, not just the added velocity. Of course, it's also going to be quite a bit less blasty. This one does have a muzzle brake on it, which these don't come stock with. These come with just a flash hider. And furthermore, here in the US, this isn't an NFA item compared to an SBR, so there's just a lot less annoying paperwork that goes into it when owning one of these compared to an SBR, which can be pretty annoying at times. And last thing I did want to touch on this barrel before I start talking about everything else on this rifle, just going kind of part by part now. This is chrome lined. This is a cold hammer forged barrel, so it is good. It is very durable. I did want to switch now, and as I mentioned at the start, I want to talk about more of the nitty-gritty details, just kind of going part by part, starting from the very back here with the butt pad. This doesn't have a whole lot of angle to it. It's pretty much just straight flat. I haven't really had any issues with it. It works fine. There are replacement butt pads that you can get. For example, Manticore Arms makes one that slants in. They do have slightly different length of pull if you go with those other options. So if you have a tiny bit of adjustment that you want to make, if you get one of these, you can look into some of those aftermarket butt pads and get a little bit of adjustment, but it's not going to be a whole lot. From there, you can see there's this little pin right here at the top. And that is how you disassemble this, field strip it. So it's pretty simple. It's a captive pin, just like on an AR. All you need to do is just pop this out, just like so. And you can see it'll come out on the other side, just right there. And it's a little bit tough. It's usually easier to use either the tip of a bullet or a tool or something, but you can get it by hand. And then once you do remove this, you take your whole bolt carrier out here in the back. But one thing you will want to keep in mind is to hold the butt pad. Things are under spring pressure under here, so you don't want them to fly out. You can hear that click. It's out now, so just hinges open. Everything comes out here in the rear. And then here's your whole bolt carrier group, just so you can see how this works. This is a long stroke gas piston. Despite that, you might think piston operated, therefore it'd be good with a suppressor as well. This does have a few issues with suppressed usage, which I'll get to later. But as far as the bolt carrier group itself, there's not a whole lot to talk about. It kind of resembles to me just like a mix of maybe kind of like an AR-18 and an AK. You can change the side that this ejects to as well. They have different bolts I believe you can request from IWI. It's not something I've looked into too much myself because I'm right-handed. This ships with a right-handed ejection, so I have never wanted to change it. So just reassembling that right there, nice and simple. Moving down to the mag, which you already saw I had in the gun. This feeds from your regular Stanag draft magazines. Fits P-mags just fine, fits the regular aluminum ones as well, you can see. I did occasionally have some failures to feed with Lancers in here, but every other mag that I've tried it with, the HK mags as well, these all work completely fine. So, talking a bit about the controls, of course, I did already mention the bolt catch is back here. It is a little bit hard also to do a manual bolt lock without a magazine in, of course, because you do need to kind of depress this while holding the charging handle back at the front, which is doable, but can be a little bit awkward at times. Luckily, that's only usually used in admin purposes, so not the worst. Now, this is different on your Tavor X95, but on the SAR, your magazine release is this lever right here at the front. You can see it jutting out right there. You just push that in, kind of the opposite of like on a G36, for example. Very simple. Works well, and I have no problem with it personally. The X95 will probably be a bit more ergonomic because the magazine release is located more by your trigger finger, but I've never had an issue with this personally because it is back there where you're going to go to reload anyway. Moving up to the ejection port, I did want to mention that you do have an ejection port cover here that of course you can reverse to the other side if you want. If you want to switch, all the other stuff to get it to eject on the other side. One thing I did want to mention now, talking about suppressors a bit. So I haven't used this with a suppressor myself at all. IWI doesn't recommend that you do, because this is a non-adjustable gas block and it does eject quite a bit of gas through the system. You kind of have the infamous Tavor face because this is not sealed. So you will have gas escaping here. If you do want to run this suppressed, I would highly recommend using a flow-through can, such as the newer SIG ones or a Huxworks, which should be pretty solid. And then again, talking about the aftermarket, you can get gasketed ejection port covers to kind of seal that gas from getting out as well if you do want to run this suppressed. But yeah, keep in mind, even if you do run a low back pressure suppressor, you will still get some unless you do switch that out, in which case it should be a little bit better. But it is still ejecting pretty close to you. So it won't be the most comfortable suppressed from everything I've heard. And just reading about that's the reason I haven't really wanted to suppress this myself, because don't really want to go through that annoyance. Moving actually slightly further back, I did want to touch on the sling attachment points that you have here. Everything that you have on this rifle is your cup or push button type of QD sling socket. So just so you can see it better, the front one is just here behind the charging handle, and it's pretty much right behind where the rail would attach on the other side, which you can switch as well. You can switch which side it charges from, which is nice for ambidexterity. One thing I have noticed, depending on how you have this slung, how tightly and all of that, sometimes I have occasionally ran into, when initially charging the rifle, sometimes I kind of bump up against the sling here in the back when I'm pulling the charging handle back. Never so much to jam it up or anything, but it does get a little bit in the way. As for your rear sling attachment point, it's just very, very far in the back right here, pretty low on the stock, and it's mirrored on the other side there as well. I personally don't really like these attachment points at all. I do wish that they were positioned a bit differently. For me personally, I would want to put the front sling attachment point up on an extended handguard of some sort, just to get it out of the way of the charging handle more. But the rear one is fine. There's no issues with that. Moving forward now, I'm going to talk about this, your Picatinny rail, right here on the top. So this is an extremely low Picatinny. If you compare that to the height that you would have, if you kind of look at the difference between the top of the stock and the Picatinny, you have a little bit of a rise. Of course, it's not a whole lot on an AR, but it does rise ever so slightly above your stock, whereas on this Tavor, it's pretty much directly in line with it. So the reason for that, I've read, is that the Israelis have their own optic is a bit higher, so it makes sense. It does end up being a comfortable cheek weld. But for a lot of the American optics, European optics, they'll sit significantly lower. So you would probably want to put a riser on here to get it to a pretty natural height if you're used to ARs, or really just in general to make it more comfortable. I'm more of a fan of pretty tall optics myself. In this case, this sits at even with this riser, this is about a 1.5 inch height, or it would be if this was on an AR. And again, there are other options to raise this entire rail a bit higher on the aftermarket. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this top rail, and also going a little bit out of order, but talking somewhat about the handguard now as well. This is very, very tall. As you can see, it's a little bit more narrow up here compared to at the rear, but either way, you can see how much you need to stretch your hand if you want to use a pressure pad on the top. If you have smaller hands, you might end up wanting to get a railed handguard, putting a pressure pad there and running it that way, because you can see how wide my hand needs to be to press this, which is still doable for me. But if you compare that to how it would be on something like this here, you can see by comparison, this is more or less how my hand was on the Tavor compared to here. Now the X95 did actually fix this. They have Picatinny rails that are molded into the stock itself right about here. In the case of the SAR though, this just has nothing on the sides. It just has this little button right here, which integrates again with that Israeli optic I was mentioning earlier. It has a built-in laser aiming module, and you would normally be able to press this to activate that. Of course, that's kind of not possible on the US market because different optics and everything like that. And if you are wondering, it's a bit of a minor caveat why I'm doing a review on the SAR. I'm talking about this even though this is actually discontinued. However, despite that, unlike certain other companies like Sig Sauer, IWI is actually still supporting the SAR. And even though it is discontinued, there are a huge amount of them still floating around. So hence why I'm doing the review. It is still pretty relevant, at least at this point in time, to talk about this because they're very easy to get. Moving to the next Picatinny. So one other problem I do have with this rifle is you have very, very limited, and really this is the same with most bullpups that I'm aware of, but there's really not a whole lot of room for you to mount a whole lot of stuff. So you have this side Picatinny, which again, you can switch which side this is on. If you want to change your charging handle to the other side, then your rail can go on that side. The issue, however, is the only rail on here that actually holds 0 is the top rail. This side one actually doesn't hold 0 at all, which is actually pretty significant. If I come back here again, if you look closely, I'm just going to push on this light right here. Just watch the rail itself. Significant front to back movement. And it didn't used to have this. I've tried a few solutions to try to make this not wiggle as much as it does, but it's not the worst in the case of this because I just am running a light on here. But if you were to want to put an IR laser or a whole bunch of stuff on there like that, an LPVO, you would very quickly run out of usable room for all of that because there is a significant amount of play in this. Moving up now to the trigger. The trigger on here has actually been replaced. So this has the regular, just stock trigger shoe, which you can see right there, just pretty average curved trigger, but the internals have been replaced with one of the Geissleys. The stock trigger on here, I've heard other people, when comparing this to other bullpups, that it's a decent trigger, but as far as comparing it to a regular rifle, this is probably the worst trigger I've ever used. I believe it was over 10 pounds when I was testing it on the scale. It is quite bad. The Geissley does improve it a lot. It's still not overall very good, but it is consistent, at least I can say that. It doesn't have too much sponginess. It breaks consistently at the same pull weight, so it's an okay trigger if you can upgrade it. I would say stock trigger is god-awful though. And then moving slightly up, talking about the safety selector, you can see when you get it, it's only going to be on one side. You can run this on the right side instead if you're left-handed. You can also get just an ambi safety as well, which would be pretty nice. You can get ones that are more flat on one side than the other, so it doesn't cause issues with your grip if you're gripping really high, and you can really solve that issue a lot, but that's how it is normally. 90-degree throw as well. No issues with that. Looking at the grip now, I'm fine with this grip. It's not the greatest either. The angle is pretty nice. It doesn't have as much texturing as I would really like, and it's a little bit more narrow than I would like as well. And also, if you do notice, this is integrated with your trigger guard, which takes a little bit to get used to, I would say, to not have an actual direct trigger guard just right around there. Instead, your whole hand is there. But it works. It protects the trigger. Moving up to the charging handle now. I did already somewhat talk about this, but a few other points I did want to mention on this. It's in a decent spot. The sling attachment point being here is more of an issue than the charging handle itself. I do wish that the charging handle would fold, because given that it's on the left side, the same side that it's going to be against me when it's slung, it can occasionally bump into gear. It's not been that bad with this actually. It's somewhat slanted up, as you can see. So it kind of keeps out of the way a little bit, of course, not entirely. Again, there is an aftermarket solution for this, a folding version, which is nice. And last up, I did want to talk about the weight of this rifle. This is a pretty heavy rifle, just a little bit over 8 pounds with nothing on it at all. Now, when you're actually shooting it, it's pretty well balanced because it is a bullpup. Everything is back here, so you don't feel the weight as much there. However, when you're just carrying it around, of course, it's still a little bit over 8 pounds, so you're going to feel that weight when it's slung. Now, one other point I wanted to mention on the weight, given that everything going on with the action is back here towards the rear of the rifle, if you're doing proper recoil control, and especially with this, there is a muzzle brake on here, as I mentioned earlier, an EFAB, you can actually get negative muzzle rise. I was getting a little bit of that. It's something that you'll have to get used to, and it's not hard to get used to it. Quite a bit different from what you'd normally expect from a regular rifle setup. Unless I did also want to mention this, I almost overlooked this earlier. you do have built-in iron sights, which are pretty good. They're actually built into the Picatinny, so the front one right now is covered by this pressure pad for the light, but the back one you can see, they just flip up like that. I do actually quite like how these are made because they have a kind of a false Picatinny on top of them, so you can mount stuff directly over them. Compared to some of the other handguards I'm aware of that have built-in backup iron sights, they don't always have that, so you can't really mount stuff over it all the time. But this is quite well thought out there, really nice. So to kind of bring things back together to conclude, my thoughts on this rifle are that it is very, very good for something like home defense or just the closer sort of stuff that you may be doing. However, as far as a general purpose rifle, using it for all sorts of stuff, if you're just looking for a 5.56 rifle, I would say you're probably much better off just getting an AR, the conventional setup. And furthermore, I think the biggest downside of this is the lack of rail space, in particular, the lack of rails that will actually hold zero. Because again, you just have this top rail, the side one does not hold zero. You were seeing earlier how much it really does shift, which is significant. The ergonomics of it under regular use for standing, crouching, all of that is totally fine. But if you are trying to do more longer range stuff, it does get a little bit awkward there. As I said, the bolt catch can get in the way if you're trying to hold back here with your support hand to steady during an accurate shot. You don't have a whole lot of room here on the front either. If you want to brace this off of a bag, it works. If you want to brace this off of certain obstacles, barriers, it'll be a little bit more awkward there. So I hope that you all found this informative. Hopefully if you're looking into buying a Tavor, maybe you found this useful in your purchasing decisions. My reasoning for doing this video a couple months ago, several months ago now, did get a comment asking to do a review on a Tavor X95, which is something also that you might want to look into. They did move some of the controls around. The magazine release in particular is closer to your trigger itself now, which might be a bit better. But had this one for several years. I wasn't going to go pick up a X95 just to review it because personally I do like the more conventional rifle setup more. But there is absolutely a good use case for this. Just keep in mind its limitations as well. So thank you all for watching, and let me know if you have any other questions on this rifle, on anything else, on your own experiences with the rifle. Love to hear it in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.